Hello, this is Dr. Pola Rosen, publisher of Education Update, and it's my great pleasure to be here today with Deborah Strobin, who's come all the way from San Francisco to New York City. She is a philanthropist and an author and has had a very unusual trajectory and journey in her life. We are so proud to be with you today, Deborah.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for coming. This is the book that Deborah has written with her brother Ilie Wacs. Deborah, An Uncommon Journey is such an appropriate title for this book, and you have certainly had an uncommon journey in your life. So I wanted to begin by talking a little bit about the beginnings of your trip. Your family was living in Vienna,
right?
And then at the beginning of right before World War II started, they had to leave.
That's
to
correct.
Save their lives. And they went to Shanghai. And one of the things that was compelling about the book, you went to school in a rickshaw some of the time.
Yes, I did.
Not something that anybody in America would say.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about your life as, in Shanghai, and what was that like?
Well, if I had to sum it all up in one day, or in one word, I should say, I would say hunger. I remember being hungry the entire time I lived in Shanghai. It was like over 10 years. And it was basically, I don't recall even having had a childhood. I really didn't have one. I had to grow up real fast. And I just remembered we were all living in one room. That's four of us in one room. You know, people tend to say, what was your apartment like? And the apartment was a room and a quarter. That was / bathroom, living room, kitchen, studio, father's workshop. And we all lived together, so there wasn't really any privacy. And the only privacy I had my own little theater behind the curtain, if you recall the part of the curtain.
Yes, I certainly do.
I was afraid you were going to ask that anyway, so I thought I'd bring it up right away. And the curtain was where I really fantasized. All the things I read about or heard about. United States, everybody has a pool, everybody has a home, and everybody has everything. And I think I lived through most of my childhood through the eyes of Esther Williams, really. And you recall that one.
I remember Esther Williams, and I never learned to swim like Esther Williams.
No, I didn't, but in my dreams I did. As she was diving, I dove in with her. And she was my idol. And that's pretty much what my life was about in terms of fantasy. That's the only way I really could keep alive was fantasizing in that sense.
Now, I think many people who think they know history don't realize that Shanghai became the home for how many?
About 18,000.
18,000
Yes.
Jewish people,
right,
who were fleeing the Nazi regime in fear of losing their lives and could not come to the United States.
That's correct.
And really, we owe Shanghai a debt of saving all these lives, including you and your family.
Right. We also owe it, frankly, also as well to the Japanese, because it was under Japanese occupation at the time. And it was the Japanese really that let us in, because you really didn't need a passport or a visa or anything to get into Shanghai.
Amazing.
But the Chinese suffered about as much as we did, really. And
of the 18,000 expatriates, or Jewish people, who were living there, how many were poor, like you describe yourself?
I would say probably 17,999.
Oh.
Pretty much all of us. I mean, there were certain people who had lived there before us, who've gotten there, and there were the Russians that lived in the French section, which was different. We sort of all lived in a ghetto, which the Japanese called the designated area, which sounded better than the word ghetto. But we all did. We were confined, if I had to guess, approximately maybe a mile of 18,000 people cramped together.
And I remember you were saying that you had one doll, and that it was heartbreaking when you moved to give up the friends that you had made. And I know that that was a very important factor. But one of the things that I found so interesting about the schools, you talk about teachers using corporal punishment.
Oh, yes.
Hitting with a ruler, was it with a ruler?
With a ruler, they needed a quota. I always felt they needed a quota somehow, the amount of hits they needed to hit. Oh, yes, the gym teacher. Yeah, they all did. Really, it was a rule, and you had to put your hand out if you did something, if you said something. I wasn't particularly athletic. I didn't even claim to be, and the fact that I wouldn't participate in some things, my hand went out and smacked. I mean, it really was disciplined, all right.
It sounds like such a difficult life. Not enough food at home,
Right.
Very cramped quarters. That was home.
That was home.
And then school, corporal punishment.
That's correct.
And how much learning took. So between the two, life was tough.
Life was tough, but you learn to adapt, and you learn. You actually learn a lot faster than you would. Because I know, like, we didn't have the kind of worries you have in the United States, as I recall. Here, now I know with my own family, when the children go to school, what college, the pressures of what college to get into. We didn't have that. We were just worried about staying alive, and going to one school, there wasn't much of an option. I went to an English school, and that's where I learned English. German was my first language.
So when you were in school, was there any teacher that stands out in your mind as a mentor or a leader or a kind person to guide the way in intellectual pursuits?
Yes, it was one of my teachers called Miss Manessa.
See, we never forget the names of those people.
We don't forget that, Miss Manessa. I was always hoping she'd adopt me. One of these things, to have that fantasy, maybe I really belonged to her. She was so wonderful. She used to, on weekends, used to pick a few children and take them home. I wasn't always one of them. I had to work hard to be noticed.
What was special about her?
She was kind. She took an interest in the children rather than, because she didn't have her own. She took an interest. She could see the hardships we had. She lived a little bit better. She lived outside the ghetto.
And she was Chinese?
No, she was actually German.
Oh, okay.
She was German. I didn't have any Chinese teachers at all. In fact, we were pretty much kept away from any, if possible, from the Chinese population, if at all. Even though we lived among them, we were not encouraged to, play with them or talk to them or anything. Although, as a child, I did sneak out, like most kids do. And,
Because you were separated or segregated, is that the reason? Or ostracized? Because there's a
segregated.
Okay, so because of that. What grade was the teacher in?
I'm trying to translate it back into what it was. I'd say probably the second grade.
Okay. And everybody was speaking or learning English?
We were all learning English. At home, we spoke German. My parents spoke 7 languages among themselves. And of course, as time went on, we learned to pick up a few things here and there, and hence the Yiddish.
Yes, right.
As you know.
Absolutely, yes. You're fluent in many languages as well. Tell us a little bit about how this book, An Uncommon Journey, which just came out, how did you come to write that? And your brother Ilie, by the way, talking about education, I know he's older than you.
Right.
And what was interesting to me is the way you divided the book up into sections.
Right.
So one section says brothers, and brother, and it alternates with a section called sister.
Right.
And it goes back and forth. It's compelling reading, and it never gets boring. And you can just sit and
right.
read it in one sitting practically.
Right.
That's how interesting it
right.
is. But I thought that was a very good arrangement of
right.
material.
Right.
So he went to study art in Paris.
Right.
He went from Shanghai to Paris. So that was a very interesting, I'm surprised your parents let him go.
Well, it was a matter of survival. We weren't sure we'd ever get out, and it was at least somebody would get out. We were never sure we'd see each other again. We weren't even sure we would survive. And it was just a matter of he had an opportunity which my parents didn't want him to give up or miss. And really, that's how it happened. And he was lucky, he was talented, and Mr. Charles Jordan, took a liking to him, and he saw the fact he was so talented when he was sketching. In fact, my brother, actually, I'm not sure I think it's in the book, but he's very modest about things. But he actually, as a little boy, sketched a little, like a hand, holding a torch with barbed wire behind it. That became the first stamp used in Palestine.
That's incredible. Mm-hmm. I did not know that. There were some of his sketches appear in this book.
Yeah, that isn't one of them.
No, it's not. I didn't notice that in there.
Yeah.
So how did the book come to be written? Let's talk about that.
All right. It was something that I've always thought about but never really wanted to do. I'm very private, and it's something there are a lot of things I didn't know, and I didn't really know what I didn't know until we wrote the book. But going to my brother on his birthday wanted to go to the Holocaust Museum. And we went to the Washington Holocaust Museum.
And that's recent, fairly
recent.
That
was quite, yes, at the time. And we just, looked around, and my brother wanted to know, is there an area that shows something about the Jewish population in Shanghai? And of course there was one. And then, he went through pictures. I was sort of looking at other things. I wasn't particularly interested in that. until I hear him just about as loud as he could say, "I don't believe this. This is my sister." And there was a picture of me, and the first picture I saw were the three little children. The middle one is really a boy, even though he looks like a girl.
Is that in here? Because I saw three children
That's
in
the
there.
one.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And you know, we were I think it was a propaganda picture because we were clean and we looked reasonably healthy. And I remember having the picture taken, but more important, seeing the picture. At first, it was hard for me to even believe. I was looking at someone looking back at me, looking back at them. It was a very uncomfortable feeling, I must tell you. There were so many feelings that went over me, I don't even know how to describe it.
But you must have been so shocked.
More
to
than
have
shocked.
Seen it in the museum.
Oh, absolutely. I expected not to see anyone alive, certainly when I went there, and more important, identifying. And then, of course, they asked, well, why don't you come back here? We have so many more photographs. Perhaps there are other people you could identify, and I was in so many of them. In school pictures, I don't even recall having them.
How did the Holocaust Museum get those photographs?
I don't know. That's a question I even have today. In particular, that particular one that was taken by the Japanese. I don't know how they got that one.
But I think what's ironic is that you, Deborah, then went back. You were invited back to the Holocaust Museum to speak about this book.
That's correct.
You and Ilie.
Yes.
And you were there relatively recently.
We were there recently, and we were there for about 4 days. And it was extremely humbling to see young children took an interest, because it's really more about the children than it is about the adults. I mean, we know what it was all about. And it was very interesting to see, at the time school was out, so people, teachers brought in students, and there were so many young children, I'm talking like teenagers, really interested in that. And, I mean, of course, there was over the loudspeaker, I must tell you, if you want to read about the book or hear about it, the survivors are in the bookstore. So thinking the survivors, perhaps that's why they came to see survivors. Oh, we want to see what they look like.
Right.
But nevertheless, they were so interested in that, and it was really
I think that's wonderful. And then you're going to be at the 92nd Street Y in New York City in January.
January, that is accurate.
And hopefully there'll be several other venues coming up.
Yes, there'll be the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco as well.
Okay. And which is your hometown.
Which is my hometown.
I know. And Ilie, your brother, lives here in New York City. Yes. And he is a practicing artist.
Yes, he is.
So we need to pay attention to some of his artworks, which
most definitely
we can show on our website. And then, what happened after Shanghai? I was surprised. I mean, I know you always wanted to come to the United States.
Right.
This was the Mecca. This was the dream. The house, the pool, or the picket fence, whatever the fantasy is.
Pretty close.
And then you ended up in Canada. How did that all happen?
Well, we had a visa. We couldn't stay in Shanghai because my father was Romanian, and Romanian quotas were the last. So we had a choice to either go to Canada or to Israel, or to Australia. My father wasn't interested in either of them. But we couldn't stay, so we were here for about a couple of months. And of course, I went to school, and I remember coming home, my mother's packing, we're leaving. I said, we just started. So we went to Canada. We stayed there for 2 years. And we left Canada when I was almost 16, because I remember in Canada, I wasn't able to go to a movie unless I went with a parent, because they wouldn't let you in unless you were over 16.
Really? And that was Montreal, I believe,
That was Montreal.
Right?
Yes. And that was a blow to me, because that was my fantasy. And I wasn't able to continue it because it didn't happen landing. It was a bit of a culture shock. And it was.
Did you have to show ID?
Yes.
For your age?
Yes, I did.
Because I was going to say you can put on a pair of heels, a little lipstick, and pass.
I tried all of it. Believe me, I tried. My father wiped it right off my mouth.
Women have ways. Even teenagers have ways.
Yeah, not quite, but yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then you were in Montreal for 2 years?
We were there for 2 years, and I went to Catholic school. And then we came back. Then we came to New York and actually stayed in Manhattan. And then I had to go to a few schools. They really didn't know where to put me, because I had trigonometry, and here I'm going into 7th grade. And ultimately, I did high school in less time than I should have.
Can you tell us something, Deborah, about the IQ test that you were administered in the United States? How old were you, and what happened?
I think I just turned 13, and since English wasn't my first language, I took the test like I needed to take before I went to school. And when I got the results, since I was conditioned, 100 is always a wonderful number. When you have tests in school, you want to be as close to 100. Well, I thought 98 was very close to 100. And I felt, oh my God, I must be genius, 98 over 100. Really didn't know anything about it, kept it to myself, because for one, I was too embarrassed to admit I was so bright. And on the other hand, when I found out it wasn't bright, another reason for keeping it quiet.
Who was the one who broke the news
About
the 98 not being so great?
Well, I saw other people and were talking about,
Oh.
oh my God, I know this one, Dr. Menz and this and this. And when I read things, I realized 98 was not good.
Right.
It was borderline.
Now, what high school did you end up going to in New York City?
I went to Julia Richmond High School.
That high school is still around. If you ever want to go back and visit,
Yes.
I'll go with you.
Yes, yes.
And then what college did you go to?
Well, I went briefly to Hunter College because my parents couldn't afford to send me to any other school. But
Right.
all my friends went to schools where they had dorms, and I took the subway and the bus, as usual, and went to school. And, of course, met my husband, who whisked me out of college.
Where were you living at the time that you took that bus and train to Hunter?
I lived in Manhattan on 98th Street off Broadway.
Okay, so you were on the Upper West Side.
Yeah.
Very good. I know that the president of Hunter College will be very delighted that you were at Hunter College.
That I had
now
a brief entrance.
Yes, but now Hunter College has become one
It's
of
co-ed.
the premier colleges.
Yeah.
It's co-ed.
It
one
wasn't
of the
co-ed at
premier
the time.
colleges of the country.
Yes, it
really.
really
It's
is. That's
got
correct.
a wonderful
That
reputation.
is true.
What else can you tell us about your life in New York, and then how did you make that move to San Francisco? And I know that there was a banana someplace in your life.
Yes, there was. Banana
How's
Republic.
that for a piece of fruit?
I'll say some fruit. Coming from New York into San Francisco?
Right,
That's right.
right.
Well, I came to San because my husband was sort of recruited by the Gap Corporation. And he had his own business, but they wanted him here. He'd done consulting for the Gap in the 60s. So we moved here, we moved to San Francisco in 1977. And this is pretty much where I started my fundraising projects, I should say. Up until then, I don't think I've ever been a volunteer in my life. I've been working and doing what most people do when you have children, you stay home. I wasn't quite liberated, but I was on the track of liberation as time went on.
What are some of your favorite causes?
Stem cell research, pediatric brain tumor research.
All very compelling. Are
Yes.
you still involved in fundraising for those organizations today?
No, I'm not.
Okay. Anything special that you are involved in today that you want to mention?
Well, I might do a fundraiser for the International Medical Corps.
So medicine seems to be
Medicine, I think, has a lot to do with Shanghai and the suffering and everything else. It seems to have taken hold of me, definitely.
You know what I found very moving, among other things in your book, is the fact that you had just a few pieces of bread for lunch, and there was another girl who came from a wealthier family. Her parents owned some kind of a grocery or a
That is
store,
correct.
and she came in with wonderful things to
Right.
eat, but never shared that.
That is correct.
And it's so sad when you said you had your little piece of bread, you put them on the radiator,
That's right.
toast them a
I
little
started
bit.
toast
and
early.
That was your lunch.
That was my lunch. And to this day, I still like toast.
Well, I want to tell you, I think that you've done a tremendous job with toast.
Haven't I?
Better than any chef I know. Now, I know your brother is a great artist, and he has done a lot of design of fabrics as well as paintings, and that artistic thread runs in your family. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've done in
What
the
I've
art
done
world?
with it in the art world. Well, my parents did not want me to go to art school. They just felt I needed to ultimately become a teacher, like everyone else. I didn't want to be a teacher, but nevertheless, I found my way. I became an interior designer. I went to school, I studied it, and I was pretty good at it, and I enjoyed it. But then, of course, after a while, I actually worked for many years at Bloomingdales. I first had my own business, and I did runways thanks to my brother, for fashion shows. And then I worked for Bloomingdales, and then I opened up the Bloomingdales design in Flint Center in Washington, because we moved from New York to Washington. And then when I came to San Francisco, I really didn't know where I would work. And I was told to go to Bullock's, which is also part of Federated. Well, I lasted about a couple of days there because nobody came in. It was an area where it wasn't the same thing. It felt more like I was selling rather than designing. So I stopped doing that, opened up my own studio because I met a friend who used to work with me in Bloomingdales. So we had a studio in Woodside, that's out in California. And that lasted for about a couple of years. And after a while, I think I had burnout because I found things were different on the West Coast in terms of sophistication, in terms of what you could do. And I think when you're getting close to telling people where to put their furniture, it's time to change. And what happened was I became active in organizations as a volunteer. And then as time went on, I found that my work interfered with my fundraising. So,
well, we could say that your work made a passageway into writing and into producing this wonderful book.
Yes.
Which is also an artistic effort of another kind. And I think we're so lucky in the United States to have you to do the wonderful things that you do, and especially with this wonderful book. So thank you so much.
Thank you,
and
Dr.
it's just
Rosen,
a
for having me.
pleasure
Thank you
to
so
have
much.
you as a friend, not just an author.
Thank you.
Thank you.